15th of June, transport in the time of COVID, news update. So there's the links. Send stuff for me at that address, or else go to that link if you want to see previous recordings on YouTube. Okay, so now here's a little question for people. Whose bike is this? Who does it belong to? Yes. And this is a
Boris.
Boris.
Yes, it is a bicycle given by Mr. Biden to Mr. Johnson.
Was it given to him or the Prime Minister? Different. It's a different thing.
Yeah, go to the Prime Minister. There is Union Jack and Stars and Stripes. Quite nice handlebars for around town, but I don't like the canty brakes and too close clearance and mud guards, and you don't need that lower gear at the bottom. But anyway, that got a few people upset. This is the Detectives Chief Superintendent, DCS, sorry, Andy Cox. His asks, I'm particularly interested in this number here. And this week he's been saying stuff, the dreadful Mr. Loophole was going on about number plates of cyclists, and he was, this is absolutely dreadful that he should have been allowed on BBC. And he's saying harm reduction approach is needed with a proportionate enforcement ethos linked to harm caused and risk anticipated. The below clearly demonstrates where the focus should be, and it should be on motor vehicles. So that's good old Andy Cox. Do follow him on Twitter. And on enforcement, there's good quality video from Police Scotland. Go to this link on Twitter. Overtaking a cyclist with less than a car's width is called a close pass. It's a careless driving offence. Drivers can face 3 points on their licence and £100 fine. Give cycle space. Good. Okay, so here's the stuff to read. Here's the reading list. Same stuff as before. New edition. There's a video of a kind of critical mass type event in Brighton you may want to look at. Nothing new on those things to read. And here, something new from Hockman Wong. Are you driving legally? From Bolt Burden Kemp. More obituaries for Alistair Hanton, by the way, one in the Guardian today. Okay, here's the equalities page. There's a Woman in Transport live networking session you've seen before. Sylvia Gotero's blog post I suggest women have a look at. There's a new Facebook page for disabled cyclists, which you may want to look at. Something from New Zealand about a woman cycling. Oh yeah, very nice piece on BBC News about a Cardiff cyclist confronting a driver who sexually harassed her, and critical mass. That's Sunday, the 11th of July in London. Also on equalities, it's not strictly transport, but there's a online event run by the very wonderful Lee Craigie, who's a commissioner for active travel in Scotland. And although it's kind of sporty stuff, they seem to have very basic bikes. So I thought I'd stick that in. Yes, now your how not to do messaging. This is something from London Borough of Hounslow, but Ruth has been saying that actually Hounslow are very good at doing lots of outreach stuff and supporting women from ethnic minorities cycling and so on and so on and so on. So this is obviously a problem with someone in the comms team, and but it should get sorted out. She did raise this image for World Bicycle Day, talking about how it's lean young men who are super fit and so on. It's mainly that we have this problem of people thinking about cycling as sport rather than transport. And I'm a cycle sport fan, as you know, but we do have to have an emphasis on cycling as a normal everyday form of transport. Another bit of how not to do messaging. The Driving for Better Business program helps employers manage work-related road safety and reduce road risk. So this is the image they chose. No, you're not allowed to use mobile phones when you're driving. Yeah, so could be some problems there for the comms team. Okay, yeah, road safety GB, someone presenting image of cyclist helmet, bright clothing, etc. Safety to both cyclists and drivers, usual false equivalents. I've tried to ask the people from Staffordshire how they, the background of this campaign, they haven't got back to me yet. Maybe there'll be some more news on that. And your victim blaming for tonight comes from Road Safety Education and Active Travel. Remember the code, step back from the road. If you see a lorry, you don't have to worry if you just don't go anywhere near the curb. There is something in the highway code about that, so can't blame them too much, but anyway. Oh yes, Derbyshire Roads Policing Unit, again, they have a very poor record on close passing of cyclists enforcement. Car versus pedals, car driver at fault, and so it's always the lesson taken is to wear helmets. They really do have a bad reputation, Derbyshire RPU, and I've very politely told them what they're doing wrong. Okay, your news from where you are in the UK. Bad news, Cardiff, Castle Streets to reopen to private cars this autumn. Just over half voted in favour of the road reopening. And elderly people want to get into the city centre by car. So bad luck for Cardiff. Sorry to see that go. Nottingham. Yes, we don't like this. Supporting more people to switch towards cleaner vehicles by installing nearly 400 charge points in the region, blah, 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 and introducing the UK's first ULEV lane, a bus lane that also allows ULEVs. We really don't want to see that. That's going to make congestion worse. The taxis allowed in there, motorbikes allowed in there. Cyclists have to go in there if there isn't a separate cycle lane. We don't want to see more motor vehicles, whatever their powering is. In London, okay. A good article there on the LCC website, about £100 million for active travel in the DFT TfL deal, which LCC talk about. Do try and read that. There's a new report from LCC on cycle parking, and I did have a bit of a go at them because the person doing it and LCC are big on pushing e-scooters, which I'm not big on, as you know. Also, the section on domestic cycle parking was not very good in my view. They need to work better on that. And as you know, the true friend of London Cycling Campaign is one who can be critical, and I'm sure they'll take the criticism on board. But do read that anyway. Nice piece, nice Twitter thread from Will Norman. Some new data demonstrating the impact of our work over the recent year on changing how people move around the city. That's a thread worth looking at. Now, here's something that Danny Williams got out of TfL board meeting. Here's something I'm going to read out to you. Since lockdown, cycling demand transformed from primarily radial commuter trips to more local trips closer to people's home. On the best available estimates, cycling trips up between 5 to 20% on pre-pandemic levels. And cycling in inner and outer London autumn 2020 up by 7%. That's inner London, and 22% outer London versus 2019. Don't forget, Outer London is a lower base. Cycling as a flexible mode increasingly being used for personal business and leisure trips, offsetting less commuter cycling because of the pandemic. So some interesting stuff there, and small gains, and we need to build on them. Okay. Hello, can you hear me now? Hello.
Sorry,
yeah, we can hear you. Crack on.
Okay. Right.
I was trying to get Dave holiday.
Yeah, you're playing with your buttons again. Now, TfL, you know about the Bishopsgate judgment and how the London cabbies forced did a JR, and there had to be a pullback on the street space programme. TfL are appealing that today and tomorrow. So read that, the brief description in the Evening Standard, and really do look out tomorrow and perhaps day after to see what the judgment is. We really do hope that's reversed. Quite an interesting piece by Councillor Ian Barnes from Enfield about the interim report concerning the Bose LTN, and do read through it. It's 24 tweets, but worthwhile for all those of you looking at monitoring of LTNs. Here's another tweet from Will Norman. Protection on the widened southbound cycle lane across Chelsea Bridge. Now 20-mile-an-hour limit, etc. Light segregation, that's good. Don't forget, there's still a competition, which Peter Murray's been talking about, for different kinds of light segregation as alternatives to one. Right, now this is in Barnet, first of two photographs. This shows another act of sabotage on counters, which is rather depressing. And this, here's some rather nice cycle stands. They look a bit rusty. They are in the new Battersea Power Station development, which is in Wandsworth. The only problem is you're not actually allowed to cycle there. So presumably you have to get off and walk somewhere, and you can't cycle. And in Barnet, again, I don't know if you can see this in the photograph, but this is the counters they've used to measure people cycling. And they actually only go up to there. So that's not really very efficient. You need to have, most cyclists are going to be closer in the secondary position or hugging the gutter. They shouldn't do, but they will be, so they won't get picked up in the counters. Finally, last two slides, something which is a bit upsetting, but I know you're very solid people who can withstand upset. And this is a sort of ritual humiliation of an elderly gentleman being made to ride a bicycle which is too small for him. Here's the photograph, prepare yourself. There he is. A bit like the kind of clown bikes. I was upset about that, and I know you are. And I was particularly upset because I've dug out some other slides showing that he does actually know how to ride a bicycle properly. There he is. There's the saddle bit better. There he is with his wife and kids. And there he is again, settled in the right position. And there you are again. He does know how to ride a bicycle, being humiliated. And finally, you know those kind of artificial pollutant, anti-pollution, pollution mopping up bits and pieces that go in some places that are supposed to stop noxious emissions or mop everything up, and they're a technical fix that doesn't really work. So here's a photo of one of them. I wouldn't use a potty mouth, as you know, but that was found its way out on social media. Okay, so that's it for today. Any corrections, additions, please tell me now.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
You said I was one of the editors of that LCC report. You said that you didn't like a section of it. I just wanted to ask what you didn't like about it.
I didn't think there was enough on the domestic parking.
Not enough information?
Yeah, I didn't think it was up to date and good enough on the domestic parking. Do you want to have a chat about it? Maybe next week we can do a thing on domestic parking.
Yeah, if you like.
Yeah, good to have you back, Pearl. It'd be great to have you speak again.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I've got plenty of hands. Well, let's go to Charles.
Hi. I don't think Rob got this in time. I just wanted to clarify a little bit of debate we had last week about the Birmingham bike beat to them. There's something like 1,000, around 1,000 a day. They got 1,000 rides a day. They got 1,400 on a Saturday. They said the response is very variable in Sutton Cold, mostly leisure, Sutton Coldfields, just people using the weekend for sort of like quite a long time, taking the bike for an hour, riding around the park. Coventry, a little bit more like a traditional bike share, 3 rides a day, using it for commuting, which really. And finally, the lady at the TFWM said their biggest threat is the scooters. Regarding, they just felt that was a threat to the success of the scheme. That was all.
Thanks for that, Charles. Thanks for the clarification there. Albeit, yeah, you weren't doing wonders for Worcestershire's internet connection there. But we'll crack on. Ruth, what's happening?
Yes, Robert, the Think message about wearing helmets. Who is Think? Is that government, TfL? Who does that?
Think was was set up about 30 years ago by DFT. It is their main publicity thing on what to do. It's sort of general road safety, official line stuff. And they did come out with it's warm weather, so wear a bicycle crash helmet. And so good to see everybody piles in. That's great. I like that. Yeah, it's part of DFT. They may be changing it because it belongs to the era of mainstream media, and now they're trying to do things more on social media. But
so how would we challenge it though, rather than just piling in on
Twitter? I mean, ideally, a lot of us have been campaigning for some time that when the new highway code comes out, it shouldn't have the recommendation to wear helmets. They should tone it down to something like consider wearing a helmet. And that gives less of an excuse for the road safety mob to spend all the time going on about helmets. But the problem is that while it's a rule, a recommendation in the highway code, you know, official road safety bodies will push helmets. So, you know, that is something I'd like to see changed. Unfortunately, they haven't accepted that the changes in the current highway code revision should allow for a change in the ruling on helmets or indeed on high vis for pedestrians and cyclists. But, you know, hopefully we can still make a noise. And so you make a noise by doing stuff on social media. But apart from that, you can't do anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go to Robin first, and then I'll come to Simon, and then I'll do Dave.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a discussion with our Oxfordshire Fire and Safety Service, who put out road safety messages in Oxfordshire, and the ones that we don't like, which the helmets and high vis ones, they get those from Road Safety GB. So and then they sometimes edit them. So we're going to talk to them about how they can edit them, but it's essentially seeing whether I don't know if you, Bob, or somebody here can get to Road Safety GB, or whether we can try and send messages up from Oxfordshire back to road safety GB, or whether the highway code changes things. But that seems to be the route. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
For those who don't know, Road Safety GB is the organisation of road safety officers employed by local authorities, and they tend to be bad, in my view. So stuff that RSGB get or produce will come from the Department for Transport at some stage or be officially approved by DFT. So that's that.
Okay, cheers, Bob. Simon?
Yeah, just, I don't want to teach this august body to how to suck eggs, but like, this is campaigning 101. If Think are doing this, I mean, earlier today, while I was like busy doing 15 other things, I just looked on the Think Twitter, profile, then on their URL, and they've got a complaints form. Just fire a complaint at them straight away and say, don't do this stupid thing. And if 10 of us do that in quick succession, rather than a Twitter pylon that just tends to make them kind of turtle up and go, oh, we did a bad thing and bad people are now shouting at us. Rather than doing that, they get a complaint saying, here's why this is a stupid thing to do. Can you not do this? And have a dialogue with us. We might get somewhere. Same with Road Safety GB officers. If there's an officer in your area that is retweeting this stuff, email, just send them a nice, polite, constructive email that says, there's a good reason why doing this doesn't help. How many lives do you think you're going to save a year by going on about this stuff versus how many lives do you think you're going to save a year by going on about the stuff that counts, etc. So I just think, rather than let's initiate another 50,000 Twitter pylons, instead let's actually send some emails to individuals and get them to rethink their attitudes.
Thanks.
Okay. And Kate's jumped in saying she's happy to ask as our resident road safety auditor expert, the best in the country as far as I'm concerned. But I'm doing a talk for road safety auditors at the conference next week as well, as a shout out for me. I'm going to go absolutely mad at it, but you've had a preview of that anyway. Dave, last I forget.
Okay,
yeah, sound like
on parking density. I'm on the phone at the moment, so it's better. Pick up on parking density because there are better parking systems which we don't use in the UK, and I think we need to start looking at those if we're going to have the number of bikes out on the street. We want to keep them neat. I can get 24 bikes parked on the car parking space, plus about half a metre, if we use the right sort of kit. And that kit can be used by tricycles and cargo bikes. Obviously, you lose some capacity if you use it that way, but it can work that way. So, and also home bike park. Hackney cyclists did that in 2003, I think, and did the report, because the publicity leaflet actually features Bob's brother sticking a bike in a locker in Ealing in about 2001, I think, Bob.
It's not my brother, I can tell you that.
Who was that then?
It was just a local resident who had a bikeaway locker. We did say some stuff about domestic parking last week, and Mark was saying that kind of vertical parking is something we should have moved on from. But I mean, if we're going to have a go next week, that would be fine. Dave, if you can send me your stuff about the 24 parking spaces, or the new kind, different standard, but specifically with regard to domestic parking.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that's also gone in Birmingham in the past week is the new cycle store, which I'm surprised they managed to get 46 bikes in. And they've used two-tier stands, but they put Sheffield stands underneath, which means that it just can't be used properly. And lots of complaints about difficulty getting in and out with bikes. So I don't know if there's any feedback from Birmingham there. And finally, I'm going to have a fire in about section 39 again, because I'm going over a few fatalities where people have been crushed by HGVs. 2 years since somebody was killed up in Glasgow. And they haven't modified the junction, They haven't done anything, and it's just a worry that we're not getting the road dangers eliminated. We should fire all road safety officers, basically.
Yeah.
Like Lambda.
Well, there we go. Yeah, just for the record, I'm kind of with Mark Strong on this one. As someone who's written quite a bit of guidance and always specified the cycle parking to be a certain width. Yeah, but you're definitely always up to maintain. Now, maybe that's a nice segue into our next session. So I did that super slick. I'm going to introduce our two infrastructure experts for the day, like Bill Jones, or my internet's getting unstable, it's telling me, and also Mark, who I just have to call Ranty. Are you here, guys?
Yep. Hello.
Right, brilliant. So what we did last week, chaps, was like kind of introduce everybody to infrastructure, because we talk about all this behaviour change stuff or whatever it is that people go on about when they're not talking about building things. By the way, I introduced it and we came up with some topics, so I can go back and draw on those, but really, like, this is a little bit of a new style format. You've got two of the best experts in the country there, and I just wanted to throw it open for people to ask questions. So I'm hoping when people have had a week to think about a really juicy infrastructure question that they can ask you, and then we'll kind of apportion it and see how we get on. So stick your hand up if you've got a question. I'll let you answer it, ask it out. If you don't want to ask it, by all means type it and I'll read it for you, and we'll try and deep dive a few issues. And if nobody says anything, then I've got 4 or 5 juicy ones from last week.
Don't make them too hard.
Don't make it too. Do you want to introduce yourself first, chaps, and let's make this all formal? Phil.
Oh, okay. Phil Jones. Some of you will know me. I'm an engineer. Yeah, well, highways and infrastructure, and I guess kind of got into planning and design for cycling probably about maybe 10, 15 years ago. Learned a lot from Brian here. We did a lot of training back in the day, didn't we? Around the time that the new LCDS was produced, and then been involved in with my colleague Adrian Lord, who is a lot longer in the tooth in terms of doing this than I am. We did most of the thinking around LTM 120. So yeah, that's me.
That's Phil, and he always used to be on my phone as Phil Manual for Streets Jones, to distinguish him from Phil Councillor Jones. But anyway, yeah, it's a man. And Mark.
Yeah, confusingly, I'm on a different handle tonight because I'm on a different computer. So yes, I'm Mark. You know me. I've done all sorts of stuff in engineering, but really it was 2011 when I started cycling to work that I think actually I should probably get into this because this is a bit more interesting than what I was doing. So yeah, all sorts of fingers and all sorts of pies, and just nice to be here to talk nonsense for the next half hour, 40 minutes.
I've known you quite a while as well. Right from your Boris Cycling officer days, that's about 2003, I think I first started hearing your name in the scene. Anyway, right, let's jump into it. Oh, some hands have gone up and gone down. I had Mark Strong's hand, but he's gone away. I can just see he's always back up again. Go on, Mark, I'll go to you first.
No, I hadn't gone away. I was just getting bad reception, and I thought I'd close the video. That's all, just to speed up the bandwidth. Well, it was the one you reacted about today, and I've been tweeting various things about East Sussex and West Sussex design stuff. And I think it's almost the meta argument. And maybe, you came back and said they're the ones with the power. And I think one of the problems is, the first problem is persuading, when you've got to a stage of bad designs, persuading the people who've come up with the bad designs to acknowledge that they're bad, because there's a lot of professional pride at stake in engineers at places like CH2M, not mentioning the ones who did the Eastbourne design, but they're the ones on the name on the plan. And Jacobs, sorry, yes,
they bought them out.
They bought them out. Sorry, Jacobs. Then, sorry, Kate. But big consultancies who feel they can do things, and when you go in and say this is crap, they go, well, we know how to do things. How dare you? And so Mark, you're a rep now of a big consultant, and Phil is a medium-sized or little consultant. But how can we persuade those places? Because I did a Twitter thread saying, They see the sunk costs. They've got lots of engineers. They think these people know how to do things. Their clients, the county councils, are accepting their bad designs. So why should they, as employers, train their staff to do any better when no one, apart from a few odd cycle campaigners, are quibbling about it? But the people who are actually paying their wages, the contractor, the consultants, are the councils. They're not complaining about the designs. So why should they change what they do? Sorry to be blunt about it.
It's a great question, I suppose. And I should say that I'll be speaking for myself rather than anybody else that I might be working for. I think you've got a big issue generally that the big consultants, even perhaps down to the medium-sized consultants, they do a lot of work on big infrastructure schemes. And a lot of the businesses are set up to do that, whether it's developments, whether it's things like High Speed 2, trunk road programs, perhaps previously nuclear power stations and this kind of thing. So what you're trying to deal with is a load of inertia from people who are used to doing that kind of work, probably now led by team leaders and directors that cut their teeth on that work perhaps 20, 30 years ago. You'll see some of the big consultants will have active travel teams or walking and cycling teams or whatever, but they tend to be sort of small niche specialists going for specific bids. So the challenge for the consultants is internal capacity building, and that needs senior staff, frankly, banging some heads together. Advice I've given others is, look, if you're being cutthroat and hard-nosed about it, even on your big schemes, you can add value to the clients with some decent active travel implementation. It's how you advise your clients and how you sort of say how you can get the best value for money for the scheme. In terms of the local authorities, and I can speak as less than 2 years ago working for one, many local authorities staff numbers are decimated, so they've got no staff left or very few staff left. Lots of people have moved on. There's lots of local authorities that pretty much operate on a commissioning basis, so everybody that they get in to do technical work is a consultant being managed by people who are left at the local authority. So they haven't necessarily got the capacity to know what good looks like or whether their briefs are any good. So really, for consultants, they need to up their game, or we need to up our game to explain things better to our clients, to try and explain why we should be doing things properly. So LTM 120 comes up all the time now, why it's important, how complying with doing things properly is a good way of getting money in. Local authorities as well, you've also got to target the councillors. So in the place I used to work, we were told by councillors and staff that nobody had heard of LTN 120, for example. So through the local cycling campaign group, we've produced some briefing notes. So we've tried to work with them. Whether that's successful is a different thing. It's really, really difficult, I think. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Mark.
That's good. Let's see what Phil says on that.
No, I agree with all of that. I mean, time was local authorities had big staff. There was a thing called the Institution of Municipal Engineers, and then it became part of the ICE. There used to be a pride and a kind of skill in local authorities, and it was hollowed out really. It was privatized like so many things, and commoditized and lowest fees, and we get fee competition, and so there's commercial pressure on consultants. People have got to stay in business, and sometimes there isn't the time. But I think it is a massive culture change. If you spent your whole career basically doing what you think people want, which is to move metal boxes around efficiently, and you get quite good at that, that's what you continue to do. So the profession is going to have to adapt, and that means training. So it is interesting. We get, I know you Brian, and Mark, you've done training as well, and others on this as well. So there is an appetite there for a lot of organisations to want to train their staff. I think it's not all bleak. We are seeing that more. I think what's changing the paradigm is this strong push from the top. There's so many local transport notes that have come out over the years. There's many of them, and they just go on the shelves and they don't have any effect. I think LTM 120 potentially might have greater weight because of gear change and because of active travel England. I mean, I think that's the kind of great white hope, really. What I've been told is it will be up and running this year. If in shadow form, there's going to be an announcement of a new national cycling and walking commissioner with high profile and clout, because engineers will do what they're told pretty much for the large part. So if their clients are asking them to do this stuff, and if commercial consultants can see a return in it, they will invest in it. They will follow the money and they'll do what the right thing is. So I think that's we kind of push on the end of a string, I think, to try to get consultants to change the world, because they will do what their clients want to do. So we have to change the clients, and hopefully the threat of withdrawing funding if they don't meet these what gear change calls a standard. LTM 120 isn't a standard, but gear change calls it a standard, which is itself, I think, quite interesting, because in the past DFT have said we don't do standards, but gear change has kind of changed the plot on that. So I think if that changes the motivation of clients, then I think other things will kind of hopefully fall into place. But active travel England has got a big role to play here. I've kind of said to anybody who listens that they should have a big role in rolling out training, just to kind of the task of raising the level of knowledge in the profession is vast, I think, but we need to just get on with it. So yeah,
we've hit a big topic. Here's me thinking we'd be talking about curb angles, but I just wanted to just throw in one thing, and that's like if Robert Huxford was here, he'd be talking about the paper that the Urban Design Group did with the Institution of Civil Engineers just on malpractice. And I start with that sheet now as one of my first slides when I talk to engineers. I go, this thing from 1982 has got a big red cross for it, and this thing that came out 6 months ago, you're supposed to be using that. So there's a certain amount of like professional malpractice as well. And I think, as a consultant as well myself, sometimes people bring in consultants, but they can't just do what you want. Proper consultants say, look, you can't do that. It's going to have to be like that. And you might get annoyed, but they're expecting like a certain level of professional competence from us as well. I can't just say, oh, well, they wanted this, so off we go. Oh, and now they want us to change it all, double fees. We have to be a little bit proper about it. But I'll bring in like there's a few that are around this topic, but I'm going to try and get some new people to ask questions. So I'm going to go to Shane next. Shane, what's your juicy question, mate? Oh, you're a bit mute. What's happened? Where's
Am I audible now?
Go away.
No, am I audible now?
Yeah, we've got you.
Yeah, all right. So just to bring in the double fees issue, is it a problem of how the projects are constructed, in that the consultants have tendered for a project and there's different project phases associated with the scheme, and there is a design budget and that's set, and once you've produced your design, the design budget is gone, and if you want to change the design, somebody needs to come up with a new design budget. And is poor design locked into the way that designs are produced and funded within the project management process? And is it a question that there needs to be a preliminary design before any consultant goes anywhere near detailed design involving costings and all that kind of stuff?
Yes. I mean, usually, well, as consultants, you bid for a project. As I say, usually there's a price quality scoring system. Well, actually, an awful lot of designs with local authorities is done through frameworks as kind of routine work, and I think the fees are just negotiated. That would be my experience. What do you think, Mark?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I mean, you've got frameworks which are still subject to mini competitions in many ways. The smaller schemes can be direct awards, which is fine. So if you've got a good relationship with the client, that's quite a good way of working. As a consultant, it is anyway. Certainly, again, just in general, there'll be some consultants who are quite happy to chase the price. The kind of work I'll get involved with, anything which is scored high on the price tends to be an alarm bell, because you know the quality will suffer, and that's your reputation. But there are some consultants who are quite happy to turn the handle and keep firing this stuff out. In terms of getting sort of the early designs done before detailed design is let loose, that does happen in many cases. It's really challenging when you're bidding for sort of the later stages, and you get presented with a design that you take one look at it and you want to run a mile because it's just so awful. And certainly I've been involved in just not going ahead with bids because we thought the designs were so awful we couldn't rescue them. And that's the problem. If you get into a bid and your bid is essentially the previous consultant's rubbish, that doesn't look good in front of the client. They may not want to sort of employ on that basis. But certainly I think a lot more time needs to be spent at the interim, sort of the preliminary interim design stage. If you can get a scheme which is kind of 85% buildable at that stage, then the 15%, it won't always take care of itself because there's always things like utilities and other things. But a lot more time spent making sure the principles are right, making sure that it's properly feasible and not just kind of a really quick design. But probably, and I'm bound to say this, I don't think the design budgets are necessarily large enough for some schemes.
Yeah, I think that's right. There is this, price still counts, doesn't it? And of course, it's public money, so you've got to spend it wisely. And it shouldn't be a kind of gravy train for consultants, but equally, there's lots of examples of consultants buying jobs. Because it's all on a formula, and you can game the system, and you think, well, if we cut our fees by this %, we know we're not the best on quality, but we'll win the job and build our reputation or build our expertise on the back of it. So it's a difficulty.
Yeah, I had a little message because it's related. A lot of someone's got just how you kick back against clients when you see things that are obviously a bit watered down, shall we say, or high quality. Do you have any experience of doing that?
You've got to be honest, I think, Brian. If you've got a good relationship with the client and the people there, you can be honest. If you're chasing a new client, then that's a little bit more difficult, I guess. Until you get that relationship, it's like anything in life. Until you actually get to know somebody, you don't really know what you can and can't say. But as a professional, you have a duty. I guess it's a grey line. It's probably a slightly movable line, but you have a duty to point out where stuff is not sufficient, especially if it's unsafe, it's not accessible. Some pretty fundamental things. You should be pointing that out. There will be compromise, there always is, but the compromise shouldn't sort of go so far that it's just unusable for most people.
I think, and hopefully we'll see how it pans out, but hopefully some of the tools in LTM 120, or the junction assessment tool, can put some kind of science, hopefully some objectivity behind, so rather than say, oh, I don't think that's very good, you say, well, it's not very good because it scores red because of this. And I don't know, I mean, we sort of came up with the junction assessment tool in drafting the LTM. We hope people like it. I'm sure, I hope that active traveling will keep it under review, because if it's not quite right, it needs to be adjusted in the light of experience. But the idea, the idea was shamelessly stolen from Brian, so I don't want to claim any credit for the concept, but we kind of reworked it a little bit to make it a bit more applicable to a wider range of junctions rather than the original London version, which was largely focused on traffic signals. So, because it's usually the junctions where it all goes wrong, isn't it? That that's the problem. It's not so difficult to get a link in. Okay, there's car parking and issues and pinch points and all the rest of it, but very often it's the junctions are the biggest problem. So, and hopefully the questions in the chat are pretty self-explanatory, and campaigners can run them and say, well, this scores 15% and the benchmark is 70. What are you doing? So I'd be interested to get feedback if anyone's tried to do that. Actually,
yeah. Cheers, Bill. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely my MO across the country. Go, oh, so you've got this low score, let me help, rather than saying, yeah, I'm the one that made sure you got that low score. All right, I'll bring in someone. Callum, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was a quick one from me. So I worked in engineering for 4 years between 2014 2018, and it always felt like the whole active travel thing was very niche and only a very small minority of people really seemed to care.
Yeah.
Is that changing at all, or not so much?
I think it is. I think it is because of the political push. Yeah, you know, that's the only thing that will change it. You're right. I mean, if you're an ambitious engineer, and even if you're interested in active travel, if there's no money going to be spent on it and it's not going to lead to a high status position, why would you do it? You know, so I hope that's going to change. If the money is going to flow through, if government is going to recognise the value of these schemes and give more money to highway authorities that do this kind of stuff well, it will raise the status of that role, and people will want to learn about it and will want to gain that expertise because it benefits them personally.
Yeah, it's getting better. I'll bring in Caroline now. Caroline, you got a question for us?
Actually, I was just raising my hand for Kate Carpenter because she hasn't got a hand. But I will just say, well, we're on the subject of looking at things from the beginning. On trunk road schemes, they're all meant to have walking, cycling and horse riding assessments done right at the beginning, which would get these things looked at, but too often it's not done early enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Kate, over to you then. We'll get them to do it as a double question.
Yes, the one of the reasons, you know, why is design not better? Definitely the sort of the survival of the lowest fee is definitely a problem. The fee to do it well is the fee that won't win the job. But for me, the single biggest thing that isn't addressed is the fact that the benefits prediction of transport schemes largely ignores mortality morbidity benefits. So cycle schemes are always competing both as discrete schemes for cycling and cycle investment within other schemes are competing with motor transport user benefits, you know, journey time savings for people in cars, and that's the big money. So if we changed modelling, and I'm trying to do this, I've started, you know, quite a big conversation about this, trying to change practice. So we costed all of the benefits and all of the costs. We would both compare active travel schemes more favourably because they come out better, and we'd identify more of them, I think. So I think modelling is and you know the economics is important, but we get modellers who say, for example, on this busy urban crossroads, we must have 2 lanes on each approach for all arms, or we'll get long queues. And actually, that is just not true, because if you take those lanes out, actually they flow okay. One good lane with a cycle lane approaching the advanced stop line, especially if you can get, you know, a separate time signalling, even better. But you can make it work. But what the modelers will tell you is it doesn't work because modelling is broken.
Yeah.
Modelling says you need lots of lanes, and you end up with, you know, what I've seen recently is 2 3-metre lanes and a 1.5 metre cycle lane, and the 3-metre lanes carry HGVs and buses. It's hopeless, but the client says, I must have 2 lanes on each approach because I'm told if I don't have 2 lanes on each approach, then I'll get long queues, and I can't accept queues because the public won't accept it. So I think, you know, that what I think of as sort of Grant Shapps mode 1, cycling is very important, we must provide for it. Grant Shapps mode 2, cyclists can have what's left over when everyone else has had what they want.
Yeah.
And that latter bit, I think, is where most of the councils are. Modelling is at the heart of it, I think. And a lot of roads are tight, you know, fitting in, if you want good cycle infrastructure, you've got to take space away from someone else, and it takes balls, and a lot of councils just don't have the courage to stand up to the small minority, in my view, who oppose it.
Yeah.
Got any observations on that, Phil or Mark? Just like I'm always with Kate.
Great.
Go on, Mark.
There was a question earlier about, and I'm not even going to try to remember what the acronym stands for, but the Witcher process.
Oh yeah.
Walking, cycling, horse riding, assessment and review, whatever it is. And with the exception of one person who I won't identify, who knows what he's doing about, or I should say, know what they are doing about this. I've not really read a decent one. And again, it's another thing that gets churned out because it's big sort of Highways England and that kind of project because the counties are still using the design manual for roads and bridges, even in situations where they shouldn't be. But they churn these things out, and with the way the standards are in design manual for roads and bridges, what you end up having is kind of tinkering around the edges. If you are going to get some infrastructure, it'll be a 3-metre shared path, probably a shocking roundabout to cross with multi-lanes of traffic. But that goes back to what I said at the beginning about the consultants need to remind their clients, who often are, they've been generally technical people at Highways England and the councils. They may not have been technically active for a long time. They're project managers and program managers. And it's about trying to explain to them at the beginning the value of it. And actually, if you're building a £250 million scheme and there's an underpass needed, which is £500,000, it's not really anything in the big scheme of things. And we talk about massive budgets here. We're not talking about having to rob Peter to pay Paul. So definitely getting those right would be good, and actually explaining the value of them at the beginning and getting those right. And often consultants kind of think to themselves, well, the client's not going to agree to do that, so we won't push it. But we'll push it. I mean, if the client says no, the client says no. It's their decision, it's their money, but push it, record it. It's not a problem. You're there to give advice and options.
Yeah, there's a sort of self-limiting really. People think it's not going to be acceptable, and they never even kind of open their mouth. There's a kind of culture of norming, isn't it? I think Highways England, I mean, before LTM 120, we worked on what is now part of DMRB CD 195, which is the kind of slimmed down bit of LTM 120 applying to the trunk road network, and we did the earlier draft of that. The problem is it's just not applied. Highways England, they've got a very convenient get out. We said, or we tried to say, don't do shared use, and they said, oh well, sometimes we need to do shared use. Well, okay, well this standard doesn't apply to shared use. Fine, okay. Then they say, oh, well, we're doing shared use on this, so we don't apply this standard. So we've got this reasonable standard for Highways England, and they never get it off the shelf because their starting point is we're doing shared use. Therefore, it doesn't apply. I'm not aware of a single Highways England project that's used CD 195. I might be wrong, and I think it's dreadful. And I think it's because Highways England set the objectives for their schemes at the outset, and the objectives are usually journey time savings, journey time reliability, reducing casualties and collisions, and there is no objective to increase the number of short trips that are undertaken by active modes. It just doesn't feature. So if you propose something, so well, that's not what the scheme's for. So there's it's not a question of not applying the standards. The standards not being kind of upheld. It's just they're not even applied in the first place. We're not even getting to first base on this.
Yeah, no, the gloves are off now. Sally, love that, Phil.
Hi. So I'm quite interested to understand how we can, everybody can better communicate schemes and what's possible and what's not possible. So I've been in meetings with officers and, I don't know, for example, staff from a school who want to make changes outside the school. They don't understand why they can't just have a double yellow line out there tomorrow, or, whatever it is. Can they not change the parking, restrict times nearby, and it's taken me years to sort of get to the bottom of how a lot of the nitty gritty of it works. And that's that day-to-day work. So, how something lands on somebody's desk, what happens to get it there, where the money is coming from, whose work stream it is, what happened, what's the process, is there a kind of, is there sort of a consultation process it has to go through? Is it something that doesn't need anything legal and therefore it's something that can be done quite quickly? And it seems to me that I've just been in so many of these meetings where I think councillors don't understand, and the public don't understand, and stakeholders don't understand, and that can actually cause a lot of problems in terms of the scheme that you can end up with and people don't understand why they can't have something that's quite different, and possibly they could have it if the starting point had been different. And And it does always seem to me that a big part of it is this issue that engineers and planners have in communicating what is and isn't possible, and how much they're willing to explain, how much they're able to explain, how much they might feel that it's not political. I don't know. I mean, this is a question, I suppose. Is it not always politically possible to explain? But it does seem that can sometimes mean that there is a bit of a disconnect between what people are asking for on the one hand and what they can get. And I mean, having spent years and years trying to get to the bottom of things, I now have a better idea, and I still don't know everything, but I have a better idea about what's possible. So I can say, well, the reason that they won't say yes to that is this, but we could ask them to do this, but actually they could do this, and they're saying no, but actually they could do it. And councillors are the same. And so although councillors can often not support things, sometimes I think that can also be because they hear all these very valid questions, and they don't necessarily feel that they've had satisfactory answers to that. Sorry, so that's a bit around the houses, but does that make is that a familiar thing? And how can I suppose, how can professionals get better at communicating some of that stuff, and how much the general public doesn't understand why things aren't better, and often even those people who would like to drive everywhere still actually think that there's some really sensible stuff that should happen that doesn't happen.
I'll jump in. I mean, I think actually it is really complicated, and it's changing all the time. I mean, Marky put that thing about Traffic Management Act Part 6, announcement today. So the details is that hopefully from December, local authorities outside London in England can start to use cameras to enforce traffic offences or traffic restrictions, which is a real big step forward, but it's really complicated, and there's probably many professionals within local authorities who don't understand it either. I mean, just to give you, I won't name the authority, but I mean, I'm in my spare time, I'm trying to campaign for a 20-mile-an-hour zone, or 20-mile-an-hour limit, where it says where I live, so you know where it is. But anyway, so you know which authority it is. And we were saying, well, this is the policy, and the guy said, well, no, it's 85th percentile speed is what you should use to determine speed limits. That went out in about 2005, And so you've got a guy in a local authority who's advising councillors that this is the way to do this, and he's years out of date. So I think there is a problem that of the profession generally, is that people don't keep up to speed with some of this stuff. I mean, again, I spoke to a guy in a local authority a couple of weeks ago. Said, "Oh yeah, LTM 120, I've heard of that. He's a Highways Development Control Officer. Judging planning consent, planning conditions, or planning applications." Yeah, LTM 120, I think I've heard something about that. Can you send me the link? And you think, crikey, isn't it your job to keep up to speed with this stuff? And so, but the system we need some checks and balances, I think, to make sure that people keep up to speed, because it is changing all the time. And so I do think, I'm just kind of doing my own profession down. I think there are people who don't spend the time to really keep up with what latest thinking is, and we have to find some way of making that happen.
Yeah, I think it goes possibly deeper than that, and anecdotally, at least, when I started the first time, I had my first stint in local government, and at director level there was an engineer, professional planner, that kind of person, and in my experience over the years, that's been dumbed down. So you often go back in the day and it was chief highways officer or chief legal officer, people that the old professions that used to run stuff, for better or worse. I started my second stint with the service manager, was an architect, so there's a professional architects department, long since gone, no structural engineers in-house in the authority I used to work at. And you get to the point as well where there's lots of staff working who are not professional staff, so they're not professionally qualified. Not to say that's the be all and end all, because lots of people have got good experience and they're in many ways better than many qualified people. But there's never been any sort of requirement for somebody at a certain level to be signing things off or being in charge of stuff, unless it's perhaps finance and legal, which has statutory backing because of what's being dealt with. And you'll find in local authorities that things like social care are the biggest thing that they spend money on. But most of the public only see the streets day to day. That's the contact. So it's streets and bins, isn't it, is what people have contact with. So the public's perception of what can be done with the money is completely odds on what the council has to spend the money on. So there's a big disconnect there. My tactic was in an authority where I had pretty much no budget that I could manage. Everything was set schemes. I simply used to tell the residents, go and speak to your councillors. They need to lobby cabinet members. What tended to happen is I'd do that once. They would write to the councillor would write to me, and I'd go back and say, no, councillor, you need to lobby the cabinet member. The cabinet member would then write to me, and I'd say, well, you are the people that make the decisions. And then some years later, I left. So that's trying to push that boulder up a hill sometimes. I think managing expectations of the public is really, really difficult because I think people aren't generally engaged in local authority work unless it affects them. So if you've got a consultation and the council are going to do something you don't like, you get involved. If you've got a particular problem, if it's birth, death, marriage, you might interact then. If it's a green bin, you might interact then. So there's a very poor level of citizen engagement, I think, in lots of cases. In terms of the engineering profession, it goes back to what we said earlier about just how hollowed out local government is. It's very corporate. There's lots of professional people, as in professional managers, directing, commissioning departments who possibly don't know what they're looking at in many cases. I don't know how you solve it. I did see in the chat somebody said there's an overhaul needed of local government, potentially, but where would that go?
I think there could be a case. Personally, I think there could be a case for more unitary authorities. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it works. I think there is a bigger disconnect between the highway authority and local people and local need when it comes to counties and districts. I'd say it's generally a bit better in unitaries.
Yeah, I suppose in unitaries, Phil, you've got the planning and the highways departments are one.
Yes.
And going back to that comment about the development control officer, I think that's probably one of the most powerful positions in local government, within highways and planning anyway, because there's an awful lot that you can agree as a development control officer. You're pushing developers to do things a certain way. And in terms of public scrutiny, once planning consent's given, it's very hard for people to change stuff. So if you can get some good stuff done, you can get it done that way. And hostile councillors don't necessarily notice, which is quite good fun.
All right, we'll work in the system now. I'll bring in Bryn. So I think his is related.
Sorry, it's probably going back to what Kate was saying earlier and Sally. So beg your pardon if I'm taking us on a different fork, but it was really Kate's main point, which I do agree with, but this might sound like a bit of a challenge, but I don't want it to sound defensive. In that, yes, the issue can be around the modelling, but it's not the modeller's fault, if you see what I mean. It's the question that they're asked. And that's kind of the problem. I think Kate said it, is that in these kind of situations, we kind of know that when we get down to the modelling, before we even start, that's going to tell us that if we want to maintain flows without restrictions through that junction, then we're not going to have the space. That's axiomatic in what we're doing. And we need to take that from the beginning. And the client and the people we're engaging with do need to accept that's their responsibility. They're not going to, it's not cakeism. They're not going to ever get a situation where that junction's going to perform and allow the same amount of traffic through. And I think there's a dishonesty there in the whole setup, and we have to address it at that level, because if we don't, we'll always get stuck. The lines will always converge, and they will always come to the modeler saying, sorry, that doesn't work. So I think Sally said that as well. It kind of goes wrong right from the beginning, and that we have to have a way. Now, my view is, and this is probably a bit controversial, it's partly because we need other clients, not highway authorities. We need people in there who care more about how that space functions in terms of active travel and people moving, because in fact that the road space, if it is dedicated to simply moving people through, whether that be in cars or even on bicycles, it's never going to accommodate that other function. And so our bigger challenge is to not have highway departments, but to have public departments who commission us and want these things doing. Sorry, that was a little.
Yeah, that's a good one. Simon, did you want to add to it before I get the guys to respond? Because I can see you're right.
Yeah, I thought that was a cracking point. And I guess really the question I'd ask is, how do we get the highways departments in the councils and the authorities that we deal with to be more coherent through the whole policy piece? So, you know, we've got so many councils and boroughs now declared climate emergencies, have climate action plans, have all sorts of stuff like that. Yet, you know, that doesn't filter down at all clearly. So how do we get that much more coherent right the way through?
So I have a modest proposal.
Sort it out, Phil.
Which is, we just need a new Highways Act. The last Highways Act came out in 1980. The one before that was 1959 or something. We're overdue another one. If you look at the Highways Act, what are highways for? They're for moving things around. They are, that's it. The only duties of a highway authority is to keep the traffic moving and to not kill too many people. And that's pretty much what they care about, and to minimize, you know, costs of maintenance. Reducing runoff, biodiversity, public health, all of that. No brownie points in that. They don't get any funding for it. They don't get wrapped up the knuckles if they don't do it. We need a new Highways Act that says what highways are for, and then highway authorities are judged against delivering against those obligations, in my view. And until we do that, you know, because you have to kind of understand, you know, follow the money, follow the motivations. If somebody doesn't do something and they're held to account, then and they get in trouble, they will do it. You know, that's what motivates people fundamentally. Well, I've got to do this because it's my job to do that. And if I don't do it, I'll be out of a job. Well, if it's your job to get more people on bikes, or if it's your job to, you know, reduce carbon emissions of transport, then that's what you'll do, because that's what you're paid to do. And if you don't do it, you'll be out of a job. And we need to institutionalize that. We need to say, what is the institution of the Highway Authority for? And then we might get that institution doing the right things to the greater good, in my view.
Not bad. Forward with Phil. Mark, have you got any comments about, or we're just nodding sagely and helping?
Nodding sagely, yeah, I agree with all that. I think the other thing as well is an old boss of mine who was a professional manager, let's face it. But one of the things that stuck with me was it was about getting councillors' fingerprints all over it. So it probably goes back a bit to what Sally was saying as well. At the end of the day, all the people that work for local authorities and the consultants and the hangers-on and everything else, they report ultimately, whether it's a council that makes decisions or a cabinet that makes decisions, there are political decision makers of one shape or form. And a lot of them are very adept at either not understanding or pretending to not understand things, or not wanting to be responsible for their own decisions. And that's not to say that officers should get bolshy about it, but things should be properly recorded. There should be properly the governance should be done properly, and it should be very clear who makes the decisions. And if a council has a reputation for facilitating the movement of cars everywhere, then there may be a highway department which is kind of a bit out of control, bit of you know, fire up the Quattro lads kind of attitude, and there are plenty out there. But ultimately, the councillors that make the decisions have to get a grasp of that and say, look, our policy is to do A, B, and C, shape up or ship out. We're the ones that make the decisions, and that flows. I mean, there's authorities where if you're trying to do the good thing, or what we think here is a good thing, those sorts of authorities will gradually nudge people out, which is fine, and that's what their electorate wants. But ultimately, yeah, you're there to do a job, and if you don't do the job, you're out.
Yeah, pointing at policy really does help you. That was always my one. People, another crazy cycling scheme running. Go, look at our policy. I'm the only one doing it. I'll bring in Robert Campbell now. He's and I was going to ask a juicy one.
unmute myself. Hi, it's been great so far. I think the key two things from my perspective. One harks back to engineers making shit infrastructure. If you look at what other countries do, like Germany, in an engineering sense, there's always a chartered engineer signing off every piece of work, regardless of who does it. And therefore, until we start to, as somebody has said, restock the highways departments and the engineering departments within organisations such as local authorities, we're never going to get the quality control and the people who want to do the right thing. It's not just that we don't often do and make infrastructure that we would like to see, is that sometimes it's done really badly and dangerously. Putting pedestrian crossings on slip roads is just a nonsense and wouldn't be passed off by any serious chartered engineer. But the second thing I think is getting back to the conversation we just had, it's about this net zero 2030 issue, I think, trying to make the questions and the decisions around what we're doing relevant to what is being touted and publicly stated as local authority strategy. As we've got here in the Northeast in Newcastle, net zero 2030, how does this thing measure up to that? And until we start getting that in place and people being judged on how successful those things are, and then get all of the stakeholders around to do that judging, be that public health, local public health authorities, as well as transport engineers. I think that's the only glimmer in the armor I can see.
Yeah, it was kind of in the comment camp, and I'm sure we'd all agree with that. You got any observations on that? Should we get another couple of questions in?
I mean, I'll just pick up the point about qualifications there, Brian. I mean, as a person who fits the description, I'd love to have everything passing me and I sign it off, and I'll make a good living from doing that. Qualification doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's any good at what they do. They have to have the relevant experience, but they have to be able to apply the principles properly. So it's part of it if you're looking at the competence of somebody. But it was just said that they would never sign, a competent chartered engineer would never sign off a crossing on a slip road. We'll just look at what Highways England are allowing to be built, and there's some very senior qualified people in the mix there, and these things are getting built. There's a slip road on the M25 near me, which is a sign up saying warning cyclists 20 yards. As the driver's reading it, you're squashed. So that's been signed off by professional people at some point. So it's not the be all and end all. And I think probably it's a big debate within the civil engineering institutions, at least, that it goes back to status and how people are seen in the industry. People get fed up with it because in many cases it's low pay, low status. What's the point of doing it? So lots of graduates get snapped up by the banking industry, believe it or not. So they've got engineering degrees and they're treated better, the money's better. And there are some people in local authorities who are treated extraordinarily badly. But it's really hard to break out of that. So it's not the be all and end all. It's been a refrain since I went to Newcastle University in 1977 and qualified as an engineer. It's been, that same conversation. In my case, it was mechanical engineering rather than civils, but it's been that same argument all the way through. We've got to do something different, I think. How? I'm not sure.
I mean, I do think as well that, we need to think about course content, and sometimes I do wonder whether actually this job of designing for transport is actually, is it fundamentally a civil engineering question? Because civil engineering really is about the materials and the construction and how things stand up. I always like, concrete doesn't think too much and it behaves in a pretty predictable way, but people aren't like that. People use, we design highways and streets and the public are out there and they do funny things. But engineers aren't taught about people and philosophy and sort of psychology. They're taught about rules and factors of safety. And I think there is there's a fundamental issue there, but putting that to one side, I know Professor John Parkin, he's part of the joint board of moderators for transport qualifications and degrees, and he's been having conversations about the course content for transport modules and highways modules, and saying it very much needs to be refreshed to reflect the new reality rather than, you know, moving cars around efficiently, which is what I was taught at university.
Yeah, I'm going to come to you in a second, Bob, but I'm just going to fess up to putting a toucan crossing across an M25 slip road, quite near Mark, actually, been involved in that one. And it was like, where else are you going to go to get this cycle route across this bloody road? Yeah, and it wasn't something that we wanted to do, but it was that or like a 5-mile detour and right off. Anyway, just want to throw that one in. Robert.
Okay.
Robert, come on.
Yes. Few points. Phil was saying that all that local authorities really feel they have to do is keep the traffic moving and not kill too many people. On keep the traffic moving, if you have a sort of network management program, what you can do is just make sure that you always keep on having someone saying pedestrian and cycle traffic as well, and just have that put in by the transport planners or councillors, leaders, the leader or whatever. The second point about killing people is we always have this problem that you're moving backwards from existing road traffic collision figures. And as you know, I've gone on about this you know, for 30 years. We have to have a different way of the different kind of metric. We have to measure danger in a different way. We have to talk about reducing danger at source. That is going to be difficult, and you're going to have changes from the DFT. There's really no other way of doing it. TfL have been doing some stuff on measuring danger, or were just before the pandemic, but that is an absolutely clear-cut thing. And finally, well, last but finally, the point about net zero. This is a bit like the road traffic reduction bill, which was out there in the late 90s. And we did have a lot of hopes with that. And if you have something like that, if you can get some sort of target for road traffic reduction, then that has to be followed through by highway authorities. So that's a big thing to go for. And just to end on a positive note, I've done a little bit of work. I've run a seminar on Rachel Aldred's master's degree, which gets some engineers in on it. And I spent a lot of time talking about risk compensation to some people who, as highway engineers, obviously weren't really interested in this whole thing about human behavior. And then one of them said, oh, is that to do with removing pedestrian guardrails? So I said, yeah. So he was kind of getting the idea. And so, you know, engineers are human beings, and a lot of them will do some thinking. So all is not lost.
Yeah, cheers for that, Bob. I'll just say as well, it's definitely worth looking up the road traffic reduction bill, particularly the first draft. I read it not so long ago, and I was like, yeah, this is exactly what we need. Imagine if that had got in the mid-90s. Anyway, I'll go to one more question, unless Phil and Mark wants to respond to Bob. I think I'll now.
No, actually, I'm gonna have to shoot off just now. So
well, yeah, you stayed later than
I did promise. So, yeah.
Much appreciated, Phil. Great. I'll let a couple of people come in with some quick ones now before we go over to Ruth. And I've made Ruth wait for the whole thing, so hopefully she can ask her a question and do a roundup, because it's been brilliant, and it's been a lot more like the philosophy of infrastructure and how we go about doing this rather than actual nuts and bolts. So I didn't expect that, but it's been all the better for it, I think. So okay, let's hit people quick then. Mark, come on, mate. You got that hand up. Is that a historical hand?
Which Mark?
You.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I just wanted to correct you, Brian. The Road Traffic Reduction Act, not a bill, actually is in law.
Yeah, I said the same thing Bob did.
No, but it's still in law, and I've just looked it up, and there is still an aim. But the point is you can pass any laws with any targets you like, but if you don't actually make it any penalties for not doing it, it's irrelevant. I wanted to talk just very quickly about LTM 120. We've done a couple of LC whips, local cycling walking infrastructure plans for the Londoners, which have been basically taking what was done before and going back and publishing or redoing it to be LTM 120 compatible. I think one of the issues is that there is a sunk cost. If you've got a place like Crawley, where we did a network which has got a lot of shared use paths and a lot of designs, it's very difficult to say all the ones you've got now are going to be out of date. You need to go back and do new ones which are not meeting your old ones, because then you get people saying, well, what are you going to do about all the old ones? Are you proposing to rip them out as well as do new ones which are better? So I think there's got to be an understanding of, and the same thing goes for actually for CD 195 about things that were already being designed, how to get out. So there is you've got to think of things of a momentum, and plans are going ahead constantly. It's not like there's a year zero and everything stops now. We all stop, and then in 6 months' time, we all stop designing things again, and everyone knows what it is. So everything is at a different stage, and it's in evolution. And there will be legacy projects which are crap, but too far down the line to uncrapify them. And the problem is trying to not to waste our time on those, because they're probably gone, but to work out where the best use of limited resources are. And if we start complaining about everything, we run out of time to complain about the things we can influence.
Thanks, Mark. Have you got any comments on uncrapification?
I think it's a really good point that Mark's made there. I mean, what I would say is when I first got really interested in this whole area, I can't remember if it was the crap cycle lanes of Warrington or something. There was a website which it was a monthly calendar of just rubbish, and it's very, very easy. And I'm probably one of the worst. I'm trying hard not to be one of those people that gets drawn into just pointing and laughing. Whereas actually, we should all be championing the good stuff or the good enough stuff. And so, some council in the south of England that might be proposing something which is complete crap that Mark was talking about earlier, we need to say, look, there's issues with this, guys. Here's an example of what it could look like, how you should be doing it. And it's just very easy to sit there doom scrolling, slacking stuff off, and it's a lot more effort to actually sit there and think about it. And maybe that's part of the reason I started doing the blogging, so I could just think about things a bit more and get my thoughts together. You're not going to change the world. You can't redesign everything for everybody. It's not your job. But giving good examples of stuff that that works, that looks good, that works well, that will get through to some engineers. It got through to me originally because prior to 2011, I wasn't particularly interested in this stuff. So you've got to try and get people's interest in why it looks good and why it works.
Yeah, and what resource your blog is as well. Well, we've got another infrastructure expert, so I'm going to let him finish off this section. Will Haynes, come on in there.
Thanks, Brian. Really good discussion. Just a quick bit of news. The DFT are rolling out a series of training courses to all local authorities across England over the course of the autumn. Well, it will be over the course of the autumn. It'll be a day-long course for up to 12 people from each local authority, which will look at implementing LTM 120. So it's clearly not going to change a huge amount, but it is moving in the right direction, I think, of raising the awareness and training people. So local authorities should now be aware of this training offer. A letter went out from the DFT yesterday. So if you've got contacts in your local authority, might be worth mentioning, have they heard about this training that will be available? Thank you.
Brilliant, that's really good to know. Thanks, Will. I hope you're giving it, mate. Ruth, over to you. By all means, comment and tie in your question and then give us some last words as well. It's over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, one of the things which I think Kate did put in the chat is about too much conflict. So, for example, Hammersmith and Fulham, we did a site meeting with an engineer about 4 years ago for some redesign structure that they'd done without real consultation with Hammersmith and Fulham Cycling. And the poor guy clearly was having to match too many briefs. He wasn't allowed to stop the buses, he wasn't allowed to deter the amount of traffic going through. Yes, they wanted to make it safe for cycling. However, we weren't going to get the right way to get across. So the fact is that 4 years later, it's still not finished and it really doesn't work. So I felt terribly sorry for him because he didn't have a chance and had been given this brief to come up with something. One of the things I was talking to Isabel Clement today, who we all know, I did a bike ride last Friday, which involved quite a lot of country cycling through Iverheath, Hillingdon, various other brothers, Maidenhead and what have you. And so many barriers and so many places where we had to lift our bikes up and over. And these are so-called kind of cycle routes, NCN or maybe not. She's talked about this beyond the bicycle and paths for everyone. And it seems to me that if everything could be designed, not for an 8 to 80-year-old, but somebody who may or may not be able to get on or off a bike or just wants to wheel, then that is something that we all should be doing or should be being done. And finally, I'm going to say this, even if I get some criticism from some quarters, a wonderful couple from Ealing in their 70s who've been cycling forever. He's on the back and she's on the front. He's called the Stoker and she's on a recumbent. There's an official name for it, which I really can't remember. They cycle everywhere in London and they had an accident crash on C9 at Kew Bridge because of the way it's designed. I've raised it with TfL. They're going to try and look at it. But if people who are seriously experienced and disabled have a crash, then that needs to be resolved instantly, not we'll have a look at it when we can manage. So that is why I bang on and on about it so much, that schemes have to join up. You have to be continuous, they have to be comfortable, and they have to be accessible for all, or they don't work. Sorry.